In 1988, John Carpenter directed and released a film called They Live. By no objective criterion could They Live be considered a great piece of cinema, because there are many, in terms of its script writing and production standards, there are flaws in it, but it is a good film in as much as it has a very relevant message. To plot spoil slightly on it, although anybody who's following me would know what They Live is about. Society has begun to seriously break down, and there's a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. A drifter character who never gets a name in the script actually ends up discovering that humanity, or what we call humanity, is infiltrated and is in fact divided into two distinct groups: the humans and the non-humans. The story ends with the hero eventually laying down his life, but realizing that the problem was that the non-humans took advantage of mainstream media, who were sending out a signal on their behalf to lull people into acquiescence. That sounds very familiar and relevant today. My own analysis that I had recently is that humanity is actually divided into four groups. There is a continuum. At the start of it, there are the human beings, and at the other end of that continuum, there are the psychopaths. But that there are actually two groups in between them. Next door to the psychopaths, there are what we call the NPCs, and then between the NPCs and the humans, there are the normies. Jamie Fletcher came out with a great analysis recently in which he said that if you are continuing to behave and respond and think in the paradigm that was set in March of 2020 in relation to COVID-19, 3 weeks to flatten the curve, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, then you are ignoring or deliberately shutting out the evidence in front of you, and you are a member of a cult. That's right. I've said this before about Jamie Fletcher's analysis and how much it clarified my own thoughts, and I'm quite happy to reiterate it. I realised that us out here in human land, if I'm going to call myself that, I might be a barking psychopath for all I know. I don't think I am, but the humans' job is a clearer one by Mr. Fletcher's analysis. Forget about the psychopaths. Forget about even the NPCs. The group that we have to get at are the normies, because they can be swayed. The problem at the moment, and similar to They Live, is that the normies are still largely, but not exclusively, under the spell in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, of RTE. Somebody said something on Twitter today about COVID-19, that, you know, there was this China virus, and then the government started ramping up the fear, and that was the point at which the mainstream media could have been an objective set of journalists, but they chose instead to go to the dark side and to become facilitators of the psychopaths. They will pay for this. They will pay for this. If you're coming out with ridiculous nonsense like John Williams' Truth Matters video of 2020, then that shows that they're frightened, because they realise that people are not impressed. We have a new religion in Ireland today. You cannot speak out against it. They are completely unaccountable. They get vast sums of taxpayer money. They have a clergy. They have bishops. They have a doctrine, and that is the NGO lobby. And their doctrine is primarily one of wokeness. They will not tolerate dissent. They will not tolerate anybody challenging them. They have complete control of the media. They operate in secrecy. They're not subject, and I mean that literally in a legal sense, they operate in secrecy, because the vast majority of the NGOs, who we refer to broadly as that NGO lobby, operate under the structure of charities. Okay, they publish accounts and all the rest of it, but they're not subject to day-to-day disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. That is because they are not a state body. The Freedom of Information Act only applies to state bodies. So what all of these ones started doing was they just manoeuvred themselves around the Freedom of Information Act. You must always remember that. They'd always find a way around these things. In Ireland today, the biggest threat to our freedom is Fine Gael. It's not the blacks or the Muslims or any of that. It's not those groups of people who have been in... But the Muslims haven't, actually. The Muslims are very shrewd in their conduct But they're also not antisocial, it must be said. I don't have a problem with the Muslims. I don't have a problem with the blacks, frankly. But what has happened has been the blacks have been goaded by the clergy of the NGO lobby to think that they're being oppressed and discriminated against in this country, and they fell for it. They took the trap, they took the bait, and they fell for the trap. The biggest threat to our freedom in Ireland is Fine Gael. Always remember that. Don't be focusing on minority groups, blacks, or any of these people. That is falling for the mermaid song of Fine Gael. They want to create discord. They want racial disharmony between these people. We have to not let them have it. That's how we will beat them. We have to not let them have it. But it has to also be on our terms. So not letting them have it doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to be insulted and threatened by loudmouths in the Black Lives Matter lobby. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the fact that we have to set our own narrative independent of the mainstream media, the NGOs and and the government and Fine Gael. A lot has been happening, and in late 2020, some politicians, I'm not entirely sure specifically who, came out with a proposal for an amendment to the Constitution, which would delimit rights to private property. So don't say you weren't warned. They're coming for your money and stuff. And that would not have been tabled in the Dáil had it not got establishment consent. They're coming for your money and stuff. I also saw an article in the paper, around the Irish Times and the Irish Examiner, which is now kind of the Cork local branch of the Irish Times, saying that a study in Europe, they don't say who, a study in Europe has found no less, that many Irish people are living in houses that are inappropriately big for them. Oh, who conducted the study? And how did they make the finding? And how did they define inappropriate? Again, this is gaslighting. And this is about going after older people who've worked all their lives to have nice homes, and now to try and guilt trip them into moving in the age of 70 or 80 or 90. And this is part of the same thing as delineating private property. They're coming for your money and stuff. These ones see older people who are in big houses, parts of Cork, Dublin, Galway, where they've spent their whole lives and the kids have flown the nest, etc. They see them as low-hanging fruit. That is what they are in many instances. Old people can be very vulnerable, and they can also be very wealthy. They're very wealthy simply because money has accumulated with them, and they're wealthy also because until the property market collapses, they have assets such as their primary home, which people want to grab and want to get their hands on. They are in many regards like the Russian kulaks. The kulaks were private farmers, and the Bolsheviks hated them because these private farmers with their private assets were a serious threat to the Bolsheviks, because people will do anything to protect their private assets, their home, their land, their money. People will do anything. So the Bolsheviks had to work very hard to break that group. And that's what's happening now. The older people in Ireland who are in homes where they've paid off the mortgages, so they own the freehold title of those. They might be in big grounds, they might be private homes. They're a target as far as Fine Gael is concerned. I use the term Fine Gael broadly. It's not just the Fine Gael party. It is absolutely the Fine Gael party, but not just. It's a bigger grouping than Fine Gael. I can say from my own personal experience that older, comfortable people are targeted. I'm not saying that as an abstract prospect. I've seen that happen. Older, wealthier people are targeted deliberately because they are old and vulnerable. That is deliberate. I can testify to that personally. So this nonsense in the Irish Times and elsewhere that we have this group of, bad old people holding on to their assets so that, it can't be broken up and given to other people. I won't say who the other people will be, who can move in and take over their home, etc., etc. It's gaslighting. Part of that gaslight is, and that's been another subset of the gaslight has been happening for a while, the notion of downsizing. Downsizing is traumatic for old people. I think it's wrong. They've worked all their lives with that home. It's their private property. What they choose to do with it is their business. Incidentally, the article in the Irish Times was also talking about how these people use their homes. There was one woman, a Julianne Prendeville from Bray in County Wicklow, and she had a letter in the Irish Times a while back. Sir, as the property crisis continues, I increasingly wonder about the introduction of a bedroom tax to Ireland. In the UK, where the bedroom tax has been enforced since 2012, under occupancy of a property in social housing has to be paid for. I propose a similar system is introduced in Ireland, but also extended to the private sector. While some might argue we already have the property tax, this is related to the value of the house, whereas the bedroom tax is related to the use of the house. The aim of the tax would be to encourage single people to live in one-bedroom units, couples to live in two-bedroom units, and families with children living at home with them to live in 3 or 4-bedroom units as appropriate. Developers would build where the demand is, and with this added incentive, people might be more inclined to seek accommodation appropriate to their family size and needs. I wonder who Julianne Prendeville from Bray, County Wicklow is and who's backing her. So we're getting into the issue not just of ownership of big houses, but also use. In other words, what people like my parents might do in the privacy of their own home. Mind your own business. The whole issue with communists is attacking privacy. Communists hate privacy. Communists want control of everything. They want control of everything from top to bottom. We're seeing also how cultural Marxism really began in earnest in the late 1950s and was used to infiltrate universities in the West. We're seeing this now. It took time. It was a seed that they planted. It was like a sleeper unit, but it's now come to action. Fine Gael are communists, so are the Greens, but the Greens are part of that Fine Gael thing. This is what we're up against. And it's always about money. Catherine Austin Fitz really said that in Planet Lockdown. It's really always about money. But what they're proposing with a bedroom tax, that Julianne Prendeville was talking about, a bedroom tax on private houses. Well, no. As long as I'm around, that's not going to be allowed to happen. That is the guilt thing on old, vulnerable people who have big houses which they worked all their lives for and which they own the freehold title of. The question is how many of those would be actually able to fight it in the High Court on the constitutional grounds of the right to privacy. How we choose to use the rooms of our house is entirely a private matter. And it is, absolutely it's a private matter, absolutely. Unless we are commercially renting out rooms to people, well then that's liable for tax, of course, you know. But if you have a couple and say their adult son living alone in a large house, how they choose to dispose of the rooms in that house, what they do in that house is entirely their own business. Nobody is entitled to know. Nobody's even entitled to ask. But that's what Julianne Prendeville is getting at. That's what Fine Gael are getting at. And they're sowing these seeds of guilt against old people who've had 30 years of RTE telling them how bad they are. They're sowing these seeds of guilt to eventually begin seizing their property and coming after their money and stuff. We're dealing with a cult here. Thomas Sheridan says that cult in Ireland is around adoration of civil servants and NGO civil servants. He's right. That's what has happened now. But it's primarily the gatekeeper of the cult is RTE, and to a lesser extent the Irish Times, but the primary culprit is RTE. Nothing has changed. We've seen the publication of a report regarding behaviour of the nuns in Tuam. And my analysis of it is that whistleblowers are persecuted then the same that they are now, because there were whistleblowers then. That people were frightened, very legitimately frightened of the consequences of speaking out. They didn't stop many people from doing it, but when they would speak out, it would be suppressed. It wouldn't get oxygen in the media. That's RTE. Now, in the 1950s, we didn't have television here. But what has happened has been that same Abrahamic slave mindset is still infesting the Irish people. It is still this mind virus that they have. It has just shifted away from adoration of the Catholic Church now to adoration of the doctrine of wokeness, which includes the doctrine that we're guilty for everything that's wrong in the world, and towards adoration of these bullies and sanctimonious CEOs and overpaid employees of the NGOs. You used to always see priests on telly. Now you see some representative of some organisation that's dealing with, usually it's dealing with immigrants. They're the new clergy. They're the ones, and they're as self-righteous. They're absolutely, these NGO people, they're as self-righteous as any bishop in the 1950s. So that's what it is, and they're doing it because they're let. But we're looking at COVID-19, we're looking at the masks, we're looking at the behaviour of people, and it's the individuals who we have to target. We have to recognise that these people who are continuing to wear masks, who are continuing to believe that you should socially isolate and all the rest of it, we need to recognise that they are victims of a cult. I need to do much further research on how cult busters get into cults and rescue people. I cannot say, but I do know one thing. If you want to rescue somebody from a cult, you don't do it by condemning them. You do it by allowing them to escape without embarrassment or any undue embarrassment on their part. There is going to be, at least in Ireland, terrible long-term trauma arising from what happened in 2020. That would be due not in small part to the fact that an awful lot of people will, in differing ways and to differing extents over differing lengths of time, realise that they were abused and taken for suckers. They have to be forgiven for that. That is a central tenet of whether it's cult busting techniques or not. It's going to be my technique. It's easy to laugh at maskers. It's easy to say, oh God, they're idiots and they fell for it. In many regards that would be correct, but it's not productive. It's not going to help things. When you're dealing with these traumatised people who are misled by Fine Gael with their enablers in RTE. I brought my father to a consultant yesterday, and the appointment had to be quite carefully stage managed because I had told the hospital, it was a private hospital, I told the hospital in advance that we would not be wearing masks. The hospital managers got back to us and they said, leave it with us, but this may take a bit of time. I said, that's fine, it's not an urgent appointment, it's just a routine checkup. So, we went to the hospital and we weren't wearing masks. This had been cleared. And I saw many elderly people wandering around the hospital, waiting for their appointments with whatever consultant they were going to, wearing masks, fiddling around with these things. And they're victims of a cult. Those people are victims. That's just what I saw. Even my father said to me, aren't they awful idiots? They're victims. And they must be treated as victims. So, for example, when you rescue somebody from a burning building, or when you rescue somebody from a siege situation, in many instances with a siege situation or with a hold-up, people will suffer from Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is the situation, of course, where I think it came from a situation in Stockholm where a bank was held up and one of the people, or at least one of the people who was under hostage, then began to empathise with the abusers. This is what's happened here. An awful lot of people in Ireland have succumbed to Stockholm Syndrome, but they were ready for that. They were groomed for that. We are complacent in many regards in the Republic of Ireland. More so, I think, to an extent than Northern Ireland, because they had the Troubles. That shook a lot of people off their perches, the Troubles did. We haven't had that. The last major Troubles we had was in 1922. But we're complacent, and Fine Gael and the people who Fine Gael, the globalists who Fine Gael have acted as puppets for, knew that. I know that myself. I'm saying that from well-established personal experience because I've been up against the state for a while in issues that I'm not going to discuss here. But if they think that you're onto them, they back down very quickly. Very, very quickly indeed, they back down. Then they try tricking you, they try goading you, That doesn't mean that they suddenly start acting honestly. But the bullying and the lies, the open, outright bullying, lies and gaslighting, they certainly change in their tenor when they realise that you are onto them. A very central principle of mine is that you have to say no to people sometimes, and that nobody will fight you for your better interests other than you. That, I suppose, is an anarchist dictum. Don't be expecting the government to be your friend or to move in to help you. They won't. You have to fight your own battles. You have to sort your own stuff out. Nobody will do it for you. Not even mum and dad. Not even mum and dad. You do see these kids in their 20s now who expect their parents to ride in and sort everything out for them. They won't. They can't. That's ridiculous. But this is why the Irish middle class are so complacent. They have been led to believe through a long, long period of extended and bloated credit and an overinflated standard of living, which most of them didn't earn. They've been led to believe, and through RTE and the Irish Times, that the government will sort everything out for them. So all they have to do is sit back and let the government do it. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And on the other hand now, the government in 2020, with RTE complicit, led these people into a cult. We've discussed before how those RTE stars, I put that in inverted commas, showed that they don't believe in the cult themselves. They had this party for a retiring colleague in which none of them obeyed any of the rules which they spent a year prattling on about and moaning to, and they're still doing it because they have incredible audaciousness. They have the neck of a giraffe. They will keep on at this, and they do it because they're let. But that should be evidence to anyone that they don't believe the mantra that they're preaching. They don't believe the mantra that they're preaching. So that's what we're up against. It's a cult. And there are a whole load of people in the normie sector of those four groups that I described there. The psychopaths, the NPCs, the normies, and the humans. The humans aren't wearing masks. The humans aren't wearing masks. But it's the normies who we have to go after, who we have to say, look, you've got Stockholm Syndrome here. You're part of a cult. We don't condemn you for it. Forgive yourselves for it. Forgive yourself. We're not laughing at you. We're not jeering you, but you're part of a cult. We are the rescuers outside the bank who are trying to get the people out of the siege. That's what we're trying to do. You won't do it by condemning people. You won't do it by ridiculing people. It doesn't work like that. All you'll do is make them further empathise with their abusers. You don't do that. Now, I don't know anything about cult busting. As I said, I'm going to look it up. But I'm very grateful again. I've been saying this a lot, but I don't mind saying it more and more. I'm very grateful to Jamie Fletcher for his analysis of the fact that, yes, these people are victims of a cult. When he said that, that completely switched the light bulb on in my head. Thomas Sheridan has said it's not a cult, it's a fully blown religion. Not really, Thomas, because the conventional religions, say Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, those conventional established religions with churches have boundaries. A cult does not have boundaries. There are many cultish elements to, say, the Roman Catholic Church, or indeed other Christian or Abrahamic churches, yes. But to describe COVID as a fully blown religion, I don't accept. It is a cult. It's not a fully blown religion. It is a cult. It's a dangerous, dark, psychotic cult. But a cult it is. People come out of a cult when they don't feel humiliated, when they feel that there are people on the outside who say, we understand what you've been through and it's not your fault. And that's how we're going to break this. And when we've broken that, the bigger subset, the COVID cult is part of it, the bigger Irish subset of the government is our friend who will sort everything out for us. And that's the other part of the cult that we have to break as well. This is not a political thing. This is a psychic thing. I'm never going to run for political office. Thomas Sheridan has said he's not interested in politics. He's right. Thomas got me to think along those lines as well. Forget about politics, because politics is full of psychopaths. And the best approach, and Thomas is absolutely right with this, you should always go NCEA, no contact ever again with psychopaths. Mike Pence did that. So Donald Trump had called upon Mr. Pence in its capacity as vice president to essentially force the congressional vote on the 6th of January. Mr. Pence was clear about the fact that he felt that he could not do that. Nancy Pelosi then approached Pence after the congressional vote had happened and the portal of blackness opened in the United States. Oh, that's a portal they've opened there. Oh, my goodness, Congress made the wrong decision on the 6th of January 2021. But anyway, that's where we're at. Pence was then approached by Nancy Pelosi to invoke the 25th Amendment. Pence did the right thing. He ignored her. He went to ground. He went silent. No contact ever again. That was absolutely the right response by Pence. I'd said beforehand that Pence had done the right thing in not trying to force the congressional vote. People were condemning him for it. No, I said he's correct to do that. I also predicted, you might remember, that Pence would not invoke the 25th Amendment, and I was right. Pence wrote back to Pelosi in the last 24 hours and said the 25th Amendment exists for the purposes of removing a president who has become incapacitated. It is not a punitive measure. It is not a political measure. It is much more drastic than that for circumstances where the person who is head of state has become mentally incapacitated. By that, it would be a stroke, it might be a heart attack, it might be a situation where he or she who is in the office just simply cannot, through medical and physical reasons, do what they're supposed to do. If the president dies, the 25th Amendment does not take effect. What happens is the vice president automatically becomes president. So the 25th Amendment is for when the president stays alive but becomes incapacitated. Pence's response was the response of a lawyer. I looked him up, he was a lawyer. Yeah, that makes sense. Mike Pence has shown himself to be a sensible, level-headed, calm man with gravitas. Will he run for election in 2024? I think it's unlikely. I don't think he wants that. I don't see that in Mike Pence. And I certainly hope that Trump does not run in 2024. That's over now. I think Trump has accepted that as well. Neither Mike Pence nor Donald Trump in the 4 years now that started, the 4-year cycle that will start on the 21st of January coming, neither of them is in the constitutional presidential line of succession. So neither of them will be in a position to take on the presidency, irrespective of what happens. I believe, this is my own prediction, it's subjective, that within 3 weeks of Biden taking over as president, people will be crying out for Trump to return, but it's too late and that can't happen. Donald Trump did not attempt to stage a coup. Whatever Lekela Ireland DND or any of the wokerati in Ireland or anywhere else are saying, Trump did not attempt to stage a coup. When he lost the vote on the 6th of January, he accepted it. He's a constitutionalist, he's a Republican. They've opened up a portal, we're seeing that now. As I said in a previous video, the Democrats now have control of both houses of Congress. How they managed to get that is questionable. They have the presidency. How they managed to get that is extremely questionable, but they have it. Constitutionally, they have it because it was ratified by Congress. So it is constitutional, it is legal. But it's over to them now. And, we'll just have to wait and see.